Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from unceded Aboriginal land. Thanks to our friends at Open House Melbourne, we have 2 more double passes to Design and Death Time Immemorial to give away tonight. You and a friend could be off to an all-day program featuring panel discussion, choice of breakout sessions, a buffet lunch, morning and afternoon tea provided. It's being held as part of NGV Melbourne Design Week this Saturday, the 1st of June, from 9:30am to 4pm at the Sanctuary Bunurong Memorial Park in Dandenong South. To win, simply text us your name, email address and what your favourite building in Melbourne is. The studio text line is 0493 213 831, and as always, please join us with your thoughts and questions for this evening's conversation. My guest this week is Kimberley Hui. Ever curious and insightful, Kimberley is a writer and architectural graduate who enjoys finding conversation openers through examining the intersection between architecture and everyday affairs. When speaking fails, she is ready to pen her thoughts on her blog, Archimist in the Making, which was founded in 2019 to document her architecture school rambles. The blog eventually extended to the Archimist podcast in 2019 to further expand on topics not commonly discussed in architecture media. When not scribing a world, you may find her drawing away at work, writing reviews, or simply tucked in another creative world. Welcome to the program, Kimberley. I'm so glad to have you on tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, we're both smiling. I think our cheeks was probably hurt tonight by the end of this.
I think this is so exciting for us because I'm in the live radio space. You're in the podcast space. You're my second podcast, architectural podcast to come on the program. And I think these collabs are always just so fun, aren't they?
It is, but I'm a little bit nervous because with podcasts, you have the control. I'm a bit of a control freak. Probably you can tell a bit later.
That's why we all go into architecture.
They always say that. And so I can edit and know where to hold my pauses and all of that, whereas live radio, it's beyond your control. So I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm very excited to join you and just have a really fun night together, really.
Thank you so much. Well, settle in, get cozy. We are here deep in the Karam and awesome radio studio and fantastic community station. And hopefully the listeners will join us tonight as well and text their questions and claim those prizes for those that are keen for a really good weekend, really good program. You're a listener of the show, so I think you know the first question that's coming up. So I might sidestep and come back to that one and ask you, why architecture?
Okay. I was playing your main question over and over again this morning when I was having breakfast. Architecture, I think for the people who know me or those who have been on my podcast or have read my blog for a very long time, I apologize because this is me repeating again. But I didn't really know if I wanted to do architecture at the first place. So long story short, I wanted to go somewhere in the science field. So I really wanted to be a vet, realized that wasn't for me. And so my mom was like, well, you like science and maths and you love art, because I was thinking of fashion design because I felt very hopeless and I thought this is probably the only thing I can do, costume design potentially. And then she said, why don't you consider architecture? And I thought, okay, I will have a think about it. And then watched the school play, fell in love with just simple stage set designs. And I thought, you know what, I just want to make people smile, just want to make people happy. And I thought I'll give architecture a go. And I think it was more of a slow burn relationship. So started just trying figuring things out. Didn't have the foundation like a lot of my peers did because they did Viscom. I don't know if that was something that you did.
Yeah. I actually did that in high school, yeah.
Yeah, our school didn't offer that. So I did more of the traditional arts. So thankfully, the brief that we were given were very abstract and it felt like approaching another VCE Year 12 art subject. And then they had art appreciation, which was right up my alley. So it was just more analyzing different types of theory and applying to them. So for instance, Ford's the beginning of the mass production of Ford cars and then understanding music video and then finding links between them. That was very natural to me because it's about writing.
It's about ideas.
Yeah. And I and it was very easy for me to adapt. And so slowly just kind of become more immersed and then be surrounded by people who I'd like to say live, breathe, and eat architecture because of the content and what they produce. And I thought it's interesting, but I have a lot of questions for the things that we're very engaged with. But I guess it was very hard for me to discuss. But somehow along the way, I just found friends who shared similar thoughts. So it was very easy for me to have those discussions. And I don't think I've ever looked back and wondered if I should have done something else. Maybe when I was newly unemployed for 2 years in architecture, I did consider quitting, but thankfully somebody reached out, took my hand, and yeah, I'm still here, really.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to unpack that idea that really shines through to me, that your understanding of architecture early on and why you chose it was that it's something that could make people happy.
I love looking after people. So I love taking care of people. I don't know why. I'm an only child, and I don't know if that impacted in any way, but I used to say I really want a sibling because I just want to look after someone. I just really want to look after people. And I obviously can't do blood and bones, just thought of seeing organs, like just ugh,
So no nursing, no healthcare then?
No, I couldn't do it. And I think I panic a lot under really high pressures, which is why I gave up the dream of becoming a vet in general, and also my comprehension, because my English isn't very strong. I am from a second speaking, like English.
You
is my
speak 4 languages.
So going back to why it brings people joy. And so I thought, well, architecture in a way is you're looking after people indirectly. And I really find it fascinating how one line on a piece of paper can make a huge difference. It could, signpost somebody to do something. It could become a wall. It could be, I don't know, a graphic that could reach and touch a lot of people, like Richard Serra's walls and things like that. And so that was how I did it. And I think the turning point for me, realized veering from wanting to do stage set design and to do more civic type work is because in second year of uni, we had this project. It was a collaboration between NMBW Studios and the Japanese studio Torafu Architects. And basically, NMBW and Torafu came up with a shell, and it was going to be used for the Footscray Big West Festival, and it was known as the Big West House. And it was a design mix year where we had to design components, and we actually had to build them, which was great because I did a lot of technology, so using a drill and a saw, all of that in primary school. So I have Mr. Beale to thank. I don't know where he is now, but he was a huge he was a huge mentor when I was in primary school. But basically we built different things, and my team, so Preeti, Irina and Julia, we were the window team. So we made like a window box that you can sit in, you can close the shutters, and then there was a hammock that also acted as a skylight curtain. And from that, I think it was just because we knew that home was going to be given to somebody, to a family in need eventually. I don't know if it's actually in accordance to standards anymore, but I think it was because of that, just knowing that I can continue to look after people. It's right up my alley. And yeah.
And in the long term,
yeah.
buildings architecture, it's for 50, 100, 150 years at least.
Yeah. So that's why I really like architecture. It's the altruistic side of things. It's looking after people regardless if it's a home. It's just, even if it's a bus shelter, even if it's, because design is really about looking after people at the end of the day, right? So
you're servicing a need.
Yeah.
You're servicing a problem.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. I want to ask about your earliest memory of a building or place.
Now it's I think, okay, earliest memory is probably, I don't know why, it's probably my flat, or the apartment we were living in Hong Kong was in North Point. So for those who don't know, because I don't sound like it, I was born in Hong Kong and I lived there until I was 8, or just before I turned 8. And then mom decided that she had enough and decided to go back home. So she grew up in Australia for a very long time. And I think it was because I was home with my auntie, and basically I just wanted to make up games, and it was just I can see it so vividly. It was the TV unit, and then a couch. Obviously, if you've been in Hong Kong, our apartments are very, very small, but it was just make believe. I love the storytelling aspects, like things that. Oh, I just really miss being a kid where you can just play and make up scenarios in your head about you pretend a couch is a mountain, you pretend the floor, the cliche, the floor is lava, and then your cushions are stones. And I don't know, I just remember just trying to cross from the couch and jump as further as I can to close to the TV cabinet, or just pretending to be Sherlock Holmes and just have mystery settings. So that's probably in terms of space wise, that's earliest memory of architecture. But if you want me to go into slightly more niche, where my friend said I think you were meant to be in architecture, was so I love doll houses. I'm still pretty much a kid. I love Sylvanian families. For those who don't know Sylvanian families, they are these fuzzy and flocked characters. I don't know if you've seen them. They're like rabbits and different woodland animals. I love them so much. They're from Japan. And basically my mom knew I wanted a dollhouse, so she gave me the cube shelf and she said, this is your dollhouse and you do whatever you want with it. And inside, because I bought one of the figurines, it was a porcupine baby, and I thought I need to make a nursery out of it. So I went and researched, like catalogued all of their nursery items. So I said, okay, I need to buy this thing. Okay, I need to buy a toilet. And I look back and I think I didn't realize that I did a schedule. So like, for those who
Fixture schedule?
Yeah. Like in architecture, our work, we have a catalog of items that we need to build something, and that is what we call a schedule. I find that really weird. I prefer calling it a catalog because it makes more sense, or an inventory list, right? And so I've been doing that since I was a kid. So unknowingly, I've been doing what I'm doing now.
Very natural thinking for you. So how have you kept that sense of joy and experimentation and play? How do you seek that out? How do you find that or continue in the everyday and through your studies and now beyond into the registration process?
So if we're going off work, I think my hobby, obviously, I guess we'll discuss a bit later, is just I'm in a very fortunate position where I'm always very used to just creating things. It's very hard for me to sit still. So it could be, all right, if I've got enough time, it's maybe I'll learn something. So maybe I'll just read a lot, and then somehow my imagination just kind of goes, ding, there's something I can do with this idea, and then I'll just write it down maybe. Or if I see something in my head, I could just envision it, then I'll draw things down. Just try and just keep myself company, because I think being an only child and in high school, I didn't know how to invite friends over. I just found that very nerve-wracking. So I thought, well, I just need to keep myself company at the end of the day, just find it. And I think I've just kept that trajectory throughout. And then at work, it's just appreciate the things that you learn every day, and just appreciate the things that you learn. I'm a vacuum for knowledge. Even if it's the most boring thing, like the most boring shortcut on our program, I'll just get very excited because I've learned something new. It's great.
You and I are both such archy nerds.
It's just learning. It's just being able to absorb and improve yourself. And I don't know if that's the same for you.
I certainly find everything interesting.
That's good.
And I think that comes with being an all-rounder as well.
Yeah.
For any students listening tonight or any other grads listening tonight that are seeking to craft their path forward, unless they have a real bend towards a particular specialisation, are really determined in that direction exclusively, the more knowledge you can accumulate, the more experiences you can get. It all leads to a better thesis project or a better all-round experience and approach to professional practice.
Yeah, and I think it's just the lives that you meet, just being an all-rounder, being, open to ideas. So then you're able to meet different people, hear different viewpoints, and that just makes your life quite enriching in that aspect, I find.
I think we first met at an architecture event.
Was it Parlour's Light at the end of the tunnel? Was it?
I'm not sure if it was Parlour's Light at the end of the tunnel or if it was a Melbourne Design Week.
I do know it was the Melbourne Design Week launch, like in person, but we've kind of crossed paths virtually.
We're virtual friends, especially in this universe or this kind of liminal space in throughout our later stages or ongoing stages of this ongoing pandemic, we're in this moment of where the digital world is the current world or is the real world.
Yeah.
A perfect segue, your blog.
Yeah.
How did you take that leap and decide I'm going to start writing about architecture, about architectural ideas, about your experience as a grad?
Writing has always been a part of me. So if it helps, I think somebody from a writing workshop that I attended ages ago, she put it so perfectly. She said to her, writing's breathing, which is really what I resonate with. And as the intro said, when speaking fails, writing, that's when I turn to. So I think it just predominantly happened very naturally. So even in high school, I was always writing about stories. Like my hobby really is afternoon sitting in front of the computer, actually writing chapters and chapters of stories, which has a start and an end and no middle. I'm still figuring things out for my characters. I digress. But in uni, it was, I knew I had to keep it with me. And so it's just started off as a series of poems. So every time I finished a project, I would accompany it with a poem dedicated to the project that I've designed, just as a way to honor the memory, at least just appreciate the forms and the time, just give it a bit of life. And I think it would have been probably second year where we started doing architecture theory, or I'm getting more immersed in architecture theory. And I thought, well, I know I've got all these things I can say, I'm just not very good at articulating it. And I know that and I love writing so much that I really would love it if my voice, or at least somebody from my age, could actually contribute those voices. So I was asking around, like, what does it take, or what does it take for people to write? And I think prior to Alchemist and Making, a group of my friends and I tried to spearhead another architecture blog on Tumblr. It was called Re-Archi. And it was trying to document me and a few of my friends' experience from interview, like getting into architecture and then starting your first year. We only lost 2 entries because it was really hard to keep track, and I didn't appreciate at that time the editing procedure, and that kind of got put to rest. But I still had other things going on. Like I would still diarize my thoughts because when you're writing, you're pretty much crafting a thought because you're taking the considerations and time to get into it. And I realized, I thought, well, it's really hard to become invited onto a publication platform because I've put myself out there. I did ask my tutor, what does it take to get to, write for other magazines and all of that. And it's probably my fault for not advocating myself better because I'm not a huge fan of talking myself up. It just doesn't make me feel good. Really weird to say this, but I thought, well, if that's the case, then to prove to others I can write, the best place is to really start with yourself. And it sounds very petty if there's no space for me in general, because unfortunately media, not just architecture media, but media in general is very insular. It's very hard to get a foot in the door. So the best thing you can do is make space for yourself, right? And so published my first article. It took probably a few months writing about it. And I think it was also at that time, third year, Kimberley really wanted to do a PhD. I don't know why, but in my head it was like, I'm definitely going to do a PhD. That voice has not popped up in a very long time.
I feel like you will.
Yeah.
I feel like you'll be back into it. You can't be such a lover of writing and theory and thoughts and not return to academia.
Yeah. So my first entry was pretty much testing. Potentially that was going to be what my PhD thesis was going to be, which was how storytelling, or at least we have always been experiencing architecture as a kid, just based on the stories that we tell each other. And I thought, okay, I'll just use this as a way, as my resume in quotes per se, to build up my writing skills and also test out my ideas. And look, if people read it, great. But at the end of the day, it's for me to understand what I will do or study eventually. And that's how the blog started. Very long-winded way of getting into it. So
I'm always interested in the journey, in the process, and how you get to that moment of putting yourself out there. And for many their blogs are a journey, a stepping stone. I spoke to Michael Smith's platform, who had the blog Red Black Architect, and then he moved into writing columns for mainstream media publications.
Yeah.
And so you moved into the podcasting space.
Yeah.
Have you found that podcasting isn't... I instinctively want to use the word easier, but it's certainly not easy.
No. I mean, radio is not easy, however, let's not forget that.
Have you found podcasting to communicate your ideas better or to a broader, more accessible audience than perhaps the blog?
This is really bad of me. I actually don't keep track of my stats or my traffic in terms of who comes into my blog or even my podcast. I mean, at the start I did, but I think it's my way of protecting myself from, because I take things quite personally, even though the motto that I'm trying to hold on to is, if they don't know you personally, don't take it personal. And I think it's just because I'd rather not think about the noise around me in terms of the content that I produce. Rather, to be honest, the podcast was pretty much a platform for my friends who don't like writing. Because when I did the blog, as I expanded and then my friends read it, but they're so good and they're not recognized in that sense, like in the media sense. I'd love for their ideas to, be put out there. And if they're not comfortable with writing, then I guess audio is the next thing to get them to express their thoughts and give them an opportunity to be on the platform and talk about, because I hope they know that I really appreciate their ideas and they're the reason why I want to keep doing it, really, because I start off, it's just 5 episodes and next thing you know, they say, oh, can we actually talk about this? Or you should talk about this. And I thought, well, if you want me to talk about it, you need to get onto it. And it was also something that I really wanted to do when I first went to Hong Kong overseas, because I was a grants coordinator for, Tina's actually mentioned this, Design Trust. So I did work as a project coordinator there briefly. And I did put forth an idea about how about we have a podcast. But I think it was just that idea wasn't very popular then. And so I think Tia's did a really good job in capturing that market. And so I took that idea back with me. And I think it was also after New Architects podcast came out. And I remember thinking, I really wanted to be a part of it because I think they really should have had a graduate or a student talk about or bounce off architects' ideas, because it's one way to at least stay relevant or at least still have a bit of a connection with the public. I think I'm going off course in this.
No, not at all. I'm very much seeing this thread where your work is all about advocating for the experience of the student, for the grad, for yourself, for the voice of yourself and your friends.
Yeah.
And so you very much bring that very important truth to the forefront.
Yeah.
Particularly because our profession for a long, long time wasn't very inclusive or welcoming of students or grads, and the dreaded label of emerging. Goodness, I could go on. I don't even know what that means, and at which point has one even emerged. But I want to ask, out of the ideas that you've explored so far, do you have a favourite?
Oh, in terms of
like podcasting conversation.
Podcasting. Oh, this is a difficult one. I think. I think the one that probably really put us, or at least made me realize the impact that we've done, was probably when Gina, so season 3 was called Is This What You Wanted? Very confronting question. But we did it during lockdown, and I think it was Gina. She was one of my really close friends and my senior back in architecture school, and we just lost contact for 6 years. Gina, if you're listening, you know this. And so
text us, Gina.
And basically she reached out and she said, oh, I really like your podcast and I think it's a really good platform, because our other friend was discussing about career trajectories in architecture, because there are a lot of people in architecture who, stay in architecture but do other things, if not leave architecture because they find fulfillment in other areas, right? And I thought, okay, well, it can't be just one episode because there are too many people who do this type. So you need to come on with me and do it with me. And I think it was because she had her own connections and then I have my own connections. We were able to reach a wider audience. And it was very sorry, very comforting to know how people are in that boat of uncertainty, because lockdown was a very hard time for a lot of people, and it was just really important for us to, how do I put it? It's just to make it known that they're not the only ones. And I think the turning point was when somebody messaged me. It was a complete stranger, and they said, just want to let you know, thank you for putting out this. I'm going through something hard time, and it really means a lot. And I didn't think about it. Again, this comes back to, I guess that's the bonus of not caring or trying not to be so aware of who's listening in, because at the end of the day, the podcast really, for me personally, it's more about a time capsule and a way to just tell myself that I've grown, or at least hopefully I've matured in the profession or in the work that I've done. So that one's probably one of the most special ones, just because of that one message. And then afterwards, I still love all of them. But yeah, this one was just the one I didn't realize what you can do, just even though you don't know them. And
Exactly.
yeah.
You just never know who's listening and who's on the other end, and who needed to hear that message or that truth of that conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your words this evening will also reach someone, and reach someone who needs to hear it and needs to hear that advice.
Yeah.
I will ask, what advice do you have for students, for grads, for those that are finding their way, trying to get their first job? I mean, the job market's not incredible out there at the moment.
I think I would like to. To preface this, it has been 5 years since I left architecture, and so hopefully the stuff I will say is relevant, because I know it is a little bit. Sometimes I might be a bit irrelevant. I think there is that acceptance that your ego and your pride is going to be severely dented when you first give things a go, because I know that it took me nearly a year and a half, well, nearly 2 years, to even land my foot in the door of an architecture practice. But I think initially when you graduate, there's that tunnel vision of you have to work for an architect, or you have to be in an architecture firm because of that. You know, the idea of the prestige and the expectation of you study and you get the job of something that you've studied for a very long time. And it can be very disheartening when it isn't the case. And so I would say don't be afraid to be hurt, because you need to understand that sometimes the hurt is predominantly a redirection into something better, or it's a good turning point for yourself. And while you're trying to find what you do, be open to the idea of architecture appears in different places. So it could be, I don't know, drafting, could be for an engineering firm. It doesn't sound glamorous. I apologize to the people that I just said that. But basically it's just accepting that you can get experiences everywhere. You're very capable of sharing what you know, because architecture is everywhere. So to quote one of my favorite quotes from Humans of New York is, we're all victims of the architect. You can get away from art, you can get away from music, you can get away from design. I think there were 3, but you can never get away from architecture. It's everywhere. And again, it comes down to how designing is looking after people at the end of the day. So it could be you're drafting a home. It doesn't sound glamorous, but hey, you're looking after somebody at the end of the day. It could be an engineering firm. It's sharing the importance of space, because sometimes they may not see the way we've been trained to see things. And I think if there's no plan A, there will always be plan B, C, D, E, and F. And which is why I kept my writing, because I knew there could be an avenue for me. So kept my blog, kept going with it. It's just try and understand and appreciate your other side talents that will keep you going while you're still focusing on trying to get a job, hopefully in an architecture firm, if that is what people want. Yeah.
Architecture appears in numerous unexpected, unusual ways. Is very, very, very true.
Yeah, pretty much, which is why that was pretty much the introduction of my podcast. It was predominantly inspired by that quote. It's that architecture is everywhere. You just can't get away from it, honestly.
It's everywhere. It is everything. And we keep coming back week after week with guests now, 47 weeks in a row,
Yeah.
about the idea that everything is architecture.
predominantly it's design in that sense as well.
Absolutely, it's design thinking. It's the same planning that's required, the same strategy, the same forethought.
Yeah.
You raise interesting ideas though about who's allowed to do what. You know, like who's an architect. Yes, we have the registration process and the label, but this idea that there's so many alternative ways to get architectural experience, architecture adjacent experience. And just this week, you were discussing on your podcast, the Archimist podcast, does someone have the right to teach? Do you have the right to teach?
Yeah.
And even that alone, it's like, oh, they've gate-kept education now. You know?
Yeah.
Do you want to share some ideas with us?
Oh, the podcast?
Yeah, from this recent conversation.
Okay. So so again, going back to try and look for work. So quick background, after I graduated, I fell in love with a firm and then went straight to Hong Kong, applied for that firm and worked there for a bit and came back, and it was very hard for me to get a job, but I knew I really wanted to keep teaching. So I did a bit of mentoring when I was in Monash, and I loved just engaging with students and talking with them ideas. So I know that I have some capabilities of doing it, and I've been invited to do a few crits that I know I have an idea of what the environment would be like. And so this conversation, the title of the latest season, Do I Have the Right to Teach, was predominantly formed from two incidents. So when I was looking for work, one of the employees, the director who interviewed me, he turns out when I left the interview, my friend who eventually got the jobs told me that when I left, he said, why does she think she has the right to teach when she doesn't have professional experience? And then I was a little bit hurt by that initially. And then afterwards, I remembered like the younger self, the 18-year-old self came back to me and said, do you remember what you said about your first tutor? Why does she have the right to teach? Because I was initially, my first semester of architecture was taught by a landscape architect, and I was very puzzled because as my conversation with my friend went was, if you look at marketing ads as be taught by industry-led people, so you think that, again, this was me not having a perception of what architecture was prior to studying architecture. And so I thought, why am I being taught by landscape architecture? Shouldn't I be taught by a landscape architect? Shouldn't I be taught by an architect? And so it made me process and think about what benefit can students get if they're being taught by somebody beyond just the architecture profession. And I think I call it my sour grapes project because it's me being very petty about all of this and just me saying, haha, I have to write over to my younger self in a sense. And I think the more I curated that season, so when I was drafting up the list, the more I thought about design teaching isn't just within the confines of your tertiary education. You can teach the public through design or using design to educate people, because not everybody understands concept, in the rote learning sense, but understanding how design can work. And also you've got, Instagram now, TikTok, people making those short snippets to give us an idea of what our education is like, again, like telling grads or giving grads an insight of what they would like. And I thought, I think it's more important for me to talk beyond the boundaries of uni. But I think still would like to get the insight of what architecture education is like. But having attended the wellbeing symposium that occurred 2 or 3 weeks ago, and just hearing about how education, especially the university I went to, how they've actively changed and improved, I'm a little bit nervous. That's why I had this preface, like the blog saying, by the way, this is 10, I'm maybe talking about things 10 or 5 years ago, but I hope the conversations I'll eventually have with my other guests demonstrates that we are actively changing and trying, see how to teach design or just continually improving ourselves. So that's the overall nutshell of what this season is. And it is a confronting question. So far I've asked my colleague, my latest episode with my colleague, and he was very confronted by it. I'm like, it's a jarring question. And I know I'm going to be asked if I have the right to teach, and I'm still thinking about it. Even the season 3, Is This What You Wanted, when my project manager listened to it, he kept asking me, so is this what you wanted, as a recurring joke. I'm thinking, what have I walked into predominantly?
It's almost a never-ending cycle of
No.
your own sort of cosmic explorations.
Yeah.
Where you're unpacking your own question, but also
Yeah.
when someone sends it back at you, you're going to turn it into a season.
I know. It's like a journal. It's like I'm putting out a journal for the public, and next thing you know, people, it's just literally rereading the journal back to me in a sense. So
When you say those questions, certain images pop into my mind, and particularly, is this what you wanted? I see a design panel or a crit instantly.
oh, amazing.
In my mind, that's somewhat what comes to be.
Yeah. Again, it is quite a confronting image.
That idea of a design defense or a design crit, and even that language, right? The design defense.
Yeah, it's interesting because, how do I put it, the design defense thing, how you say it's design defense, it's, for me, I don't know what your experience is with your tutors and the communication you have with your critics, but for me it's more that, well, I don't know if you're going to give me constructive feedback or if you're going to be able to phrase. I guess it comes down to communication at the end of the day. So I think it's more about exploration of how do you communicate ideas, or how do you be a good soundboard or a springboard with people as well. Because I think
Such a key skill, and just not taught.
yeah.
I don't feel that is taught to others to then explore properly.
Yeah. Which is probably why, going back to writing, back then when I was an assistant tutor, to my students, I always say to them, if you don't know what you want to present, maybe try writing it down. It's such a confronting thing. Okay, I only came to realization, this is very late, 3 years ago, because when I first started writing for Yellow Trace, in my head, I was just blown away that I was able to even land a gig. That was so amazing, right? And I always find it very confounding. I don't know if that's the right term, but basically I found it very confusing whenever people say, oh, it's really incredible that you can write things. And in my head, I'm thinking, but we can speak, but so surely you should be able to write what you speak, right? And turns out it wasn't the case.
It was so easy for you. You didn't quite see that it's not for everybody else.
Well, for me, it's like, again, English is my second language. And so English was never was never my best subject because grammar and all of that. And so to me, that's why I always just felt that it was probably a me problem, where I'm not very good of the grammatical side of things. And so therefore that's why I struggle behind everybody. So I found it very confusing when some people say that it just comes to you naturally. To me, I'm thinking, but you surely, like, that's why I have this cycle. And so it only took me until 3 years ago, because that was when I started working, where I realized that unfortunately our industry isn't very good in written communication sometimes, or that's why we have this problem of, archy speak. It's because we're not trained to learn to communicate with different people as well. So don't know about it.
And to communicate out the tower, that's why Archy Speak is banned on Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash, and you won't believe some of the shocked looks that I've received when I tell people that in the briefing. But that's what it's about. We're talking really to the whole public.
Yeah.
We're speaking outside our bubble and across time scales as well. I get the feeling, though, that a lot of your work is very reflective. So you do think about the present, but there's a lot of looking back at the past as well.
Yeah. I think I don't know why, but I think it's just something I've always done, probably based on the events. I think it's about taking accountability for the things that you do, because I personally try not to. So I think the best way to preface it is, for instance, if I get really angry, I don't want to blame somebody immediately. The first thing I want to do is step back and assess, why am I angry? Are the actions done by me, or is it done by somebody else? Because there's no point blindly going for things unless you understand yourself. I think I'm very much about, you are with yourself. to quote one of my favorite K-dramas. It's called Run On, and her quote is, "You are with yourself the longest." And so that's why I'm always very conscious about why do I do these things, because sometimes you say things and you forget, and that's very normal for everybody. Even I forget some of the things that I say, but I think it's just I know the weight of words can carry. So how you can hurt somebody, you know, how you can help somebody, those are very important things, which is why before I, you know, rush into saying all these reasons why I am denied blah, 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 I need to first look back and to hang on, have I done anything to, like, could I have been in a better position if I've done something about it? So it's carrying the lessons and continue to grow and just be a better person, really.
Yeah, that critical reflective thinking is a key ingredient in architecture and design thinking and innovation, isn't it?
Yeah. The only downside is sometimes I wish I don't go home with a, you know, performance review in my head of how did I do today almost every day. And it's very tiring because sometimes you can just end up, you know, go the whole, well, it's me type of situation. I'm like, no, you're not doing that.
Just have to let that one go.
Yeah.
And move forward. I often do like to ask what people are forecasting is coming up on the horizon in terms of architectural ideas and big architectural discourse. Any sort of trends, I guess. What are you seeing on your radar?
I mean, currently you obviously have people talking about well-being, which is a very big thing. And I think sustainability, the whole climate change, which is a very forefront of material. And I think so there is two, I feel like, would be the undercurrent or the continual conversations that we'll have for a very long time. And I guess the next thing you wonder is in terms of, you know, AI and technology, which has been a very ongoing conversation. It's only started to surface again. But I'm not really good at this whole forecasting thing. This is a really fun challenge, actually. Something I like to believe is probably, this is a bit grim, but potentially it's about, you know, our economy pretty much. If we're talking in the context of Australia, you know, you have that housing crisis and those types of situations, the homelessness. I mean, it's been a very ongoing conversation for a very long time, but I think with the economic pressures, that conversation will lift up the old conversations back, because I think that generally whatever's in the media really is a recycle of problems that we've had for a very long time. It's just they keep taking turns. So that's how I see it in terms of you'll definitely see old things coming back to it. And I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you certainly have, in a way, this key threads, I guess, in the media space and in the creative output space. Though you mention AI, big conversations. I feel whether we love it, we hate it, we use it, we reject it.
Yeah.
You kind of have to keep one eye on it.
Yeah.
And don't sleep with your eyes closed around it either. So how do you feel about AI, and particularly as a writer?
Okay. I basically, I'm still very hesitant on it. I think for me, my stance is I don't mind people using it, but they need to think about how they use it. So in this case, it's something I find a bit annoying is sometimes people just use AI, ask them to spit a text and just copy and paste it in and just submit things. And I thought, but are you proud of the work that you've done? I get if you're not proud of what you've done, you're just doing it for whatever, then fine. But if you're somebody who's very proud of what you do, your own reputation, take the time to see how it can help you improve. Because to be honest, the closest thing to AI that I've been using for a very long time was Grammarly, because somebody introduced it to me to help me improve my writing. And it helped because I was, again, actively listening, and, you know, the whole reflective thing is just be able to appreciate the stuff that you do and the lessons that you've learned.
You were taking the lessons from the tool.
Yeah. And so gradually then I've stopped using it as frequently because I've become a little bit more confident. So I'm okay with people using that, but in cases of people using it without appreciating how things get there, I think I'm somebody who just really likes to understand the history of things. Yeah. So it's just understand how you got there to the first place. Because if you can't learn the lessons and you become reliant on it, then what does that say about them in terms of personal growth or their work ethic, really.
It's this idea of intention, why are you using it?
Yeah.
Are you automating a banal task to make your high value tasks more productive or more featured?
Yeah, it's like try not to take it for granted. I think that's something it's very easy for a lot of us to do, is to take things for granted. So that's my stance on AI. And also the other thing is I'm very nervous about people, like if you use it for work, great, but I hope they think about in what context, because I attended a writing workshop and it was a copywriting workshop, and at the end of the lesson the copywriter demonstrated how to use ChatGPT to help him as a tool, which was fun. But then when we all left, everybody went oh dear, because it was more that they read your information. So what happens if you decide to type something confidential in? They're still going to read it. So I just hope people think a little bit before rushing into it. So I guess my take on AI is I think it's a byproduct of society so reliant on efficiency, which can be quite detrimental to the way we live sometimes. So that's on my soapbox.
and the output we haven't seen anything come out of these AI models yet that is legitimately threatening to human production or to the artist. That quality just is not there.
Yeah, I think the only thing that one of the New York Times on the podcast The Daily, they really talked 2 articles. So one was from Sarah Anderson, it was this artist, and how she talks about, unfortunately, her work because it's been learnt by the AI very badly, but people still notice how it looks like her work. And so she unfortunately became a victim of, because people used her work as really negative propaganda type. And so she got targeted, even though it wasn't her, it was the bot doing it. And then you've got a bunch of comedians who are a bit concerned, because I think it could happen to me too, because I've got enough articles that people can feed to teach them how to write in our style. And so it's very easy to be manipulated if you're not, like if you're somebody who skims it, like it's very easy for you to just miss that it's written by somebody else. So again, I think it's the victim of being efficient, like you just, and then afterwards you forget that you need to analyze and just ask yourself questions before you dive into.
I love that.
Somebody else.
Just the importance of asking those questions, taking that time, thinking critically. It's almost about to call it a resistance to the rush and the output.
Yeah.
And people don't see that. They don't see that process.
No.
Do they?
No, they don't. I mean, I'm kind of one of the guilty ones, because I panic, and so sometimes I do things really quickly, and that's where I make careless mistakes. I think that's my way of saying, before we make more careless mistakes here, let's step back and analyze. And I guess it's also based on our experience, in our practice, our everyday practice. We unfortunately do have really tight deadlines, and I think it's just, along with all the technologies, like we can spit out renders, and so renders is a visualization, image for visualization. So it makes asking the computer to take a photo of what a finished product would look like. And basically it's, how do I say it? And I think it's because of these technology, it just makes people think that we can do things very quickly on the spot. And so they forget that things take time. If you want quality, it takes time.
It's the age-old joke of, you just push a button, right? Push a big red architecture button on the table. Absolutely not.
Well, can we ask them for their occupation? Oh, you just push a button, right? Let's be equally patronizing and condescending on somebody in their occupation. That's how I like to flip it. I'm a bit sassy when it comes like that. So...
It's certainly a long time, and sometimes social media just warps our perception of how quickly things get put out and how quickly things get done. And that rat race just continues, whereas anything quality takes time, takes hours, takes investment, and therefore also takes fees.
Yeah. I wish people understand that. I guess we're talking about like our profession being paid enough, and all. I find it a very hard topic to talk about, because unfortunately I'm still in a crux of understanding like the whole payments and all of that. And then there's that going back to what we learn in our architecture education is is, communicating. And something we're not very good to learn about is advocating for ourselves. I mean, personally for me, I don't really like talking up about myself, but I remember even me learning and trying to negotiate. It was a whole exercise and it was very uncomfortable because I have to say, this is what I've contributed and all of that. And I hope something people can take away is, again, going back to our early conversation about having the permission, is you have the right, or let us say you have the permission to advocate for yourself and talk broadly about yourself and appreciate the things that you've done. Because I don't, again, in the whole rush, we forget to turn back and look at all the things that we've done. I only recently learned that this is from, is it Tony Collins or Tony Robbins? I apologize if I got the name wrong. But one of the quotes that was given to me from Eugenia Tan when we interviewed her for season 3, she said, people often overestimate what they can do in 1 year, underestimate what they can do in 10. So I hope they can apply that theory, not saying that you look back at what you've done in 10 years, but maybe, in 1.5 years per se, and realize how much you've achieved or how much you've grown and how much you've learned, and think about how, put yourself back in your young shoes and think, oh my goodness, I wouldn't have done something like this, but I now know. And so, yeah, advocate for yourself, study your information before going in to advocate for yourself, because that's very important.
Dot your T's, cross your I's.
Yes, please. Please read your your information and knowledge so that you come in and people don't assume, oh, they just want to negotiate a raise, but really come in and say you've armed yourself with all this knowledge and just be a better person and just make sure you're being remunerated or be appreciated for it, really.
And talk about the value you're contributing. It's these big picture conversations about our profession, being able to communicate the value of what we do.
Yeah.
When my guest on the program, Maureen Moss, just a few weeks ago, spoke about how much easier it was for her, who wasn't an architect, to communicate the value of architecture or an architect's work.
Yeah.
And it's almost that double-edged sword, that challenge of being able to sell yourself.
Yeah. I sometimes think, I was looking back one of my old pieces because it was after reading Elizabeth Fowley's article about how to write a good critique on a building, and I was looking back on my old writing about where the architecture criticisms go, and I remember one of the lines that said, do you know who's best to advocate for us? Just get somebody who's not in architecture, because they have the right language of people who are not in our industry and be able to, upsell it and all of that. Or if you want somebody to critique a building fairly, also get people who are not in architecture so they can make all the comments that we want to say, but we can't, because unfortunately Australia has the biggest defamation laws. Our defamation laws are very, very harsh in terms of penalties and all of that. You can do the job for me, thank you very much, and I'll be safe. And all of that, don't quote me on
That didn't stop Norman Day in the press a couple of months ago.
Oh,
that gets the public talking about architecture and bringing it back into print media.
Yeah.
I think print media doesn't necessarily touch it too often. No. Radio is amazing with architectural commentary.
Yeah.
But I really want to encourage architects to speak to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Speak outwardly. Speak to colleagues, speak to friends, speak to people who don't know about architecture.
Or just not even hide behind, that sounds so unfair, but just not rely on the finished product. I think something that a lot of us always talk about, we always keep talking about this in architecture media, but it seldom happens, even if architects post, the behind the scenes. It's humanizing architecture. It's thinking about design is not a luxury. Unfortunately, people don't see that design is a necessity, but really is an aesthetic and is a luxury. And it's
so right.
Yeah, it's because of, Instagram, the aesthetics and always pretty, and, Pinterest, you have all these inspirations. It's the very high end culture. But I think it's, even if we can just appreciate, for instance, the pencil or the pens that we use, that is design. And the reason why you potentially like the pen that you're holding is because somebody's gone through iterations to make it comfortable for you to write. So think about that, but now on a larger scale. So maybe start off with your car or the chair that you're sitting on, and then gradually increase it to a house or even any infrastructure that you own. It's because, again, the overarching conversation is that it's everywhere for us, right? So
absolutely, just comes back to your first point of you went into architecture because you want to care for people and you want to make them happy.
Yeah.
And housing is a basic human right, and it's the fundamental foundation of a happy, healthy, productive member of society. You've got to get that right for everything else to excel.
Yeah.
And to have an amazing home, a safe home, a livable home, a healthy home. That's what we talk about. We talk about amazing. It doesn't have to be flash or expensive, Carrera marble. It just needs to be cheap to heat, cheap to cool,
and
good sunlight, no mold, fresh air, clean air.
Yeah, the ability to feel safe. I think that's the most important thing, is ensure that the environment is safe. I mean, we can only do so much, and it's also about informing how people can also look after the homes, because it's a partnership at the end of the day. Design is a partnership of how we utilize the items that's being given to us at the end of the day as well. So
that's a nice a moment to segue into my last question. And that's, what gives you hope?
Oh, this one I did not really spend too much time thinking about when I was preparing my breakfast this morning. I think hope is what gives me hope is about how individuals have optimism, or individuals' aspirations and their step to achieve their goals. I think I'm saying this from a very goal-orientated person, because I'm somebody who has a checklist, invisible checklist. Like, these are the things that I really want to do. So being on radio is one of them. So thank you. So I'd like to believe that if people have a drive, like something that benefits to society or even benefits to themselves, just be able to enjoy each day just by waking up, being grateful for being alive and carrying on the things that they can do. That's more than enough for me. It's just people having the will to be able to do something each day. And that's more than enough for me, in a way.
Beautiful. Kimberley Hui, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. You've offered such a comfortable space. So thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
G'day, this is Al Carlson, and I'm kicking on with you on Radio Karim. Keep it locked.